Well, welcome. Thank you very much for being here today. This event is called Striving to Think Outside the Box, one of the Moments of Mercy events that are being put on here over the last few weeks. It's brought to you by the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. My name is Megan Duffy. I am the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And today what we want to do, a lot of times with especially DEI, as we call it, pieces, we talk about specific populations or specific groups of people. But today we're going to have a little bit different approach where we talk a little bit more about maybe a broader brush of how to maybe be more inclusive towards all groups of people. To start off real quick, perhaps, yes, I do want to tell you a little bit about our committee. If you're unfamiliar, we do have one here. It's a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. It is a volunteer committee here within Mercy. Our mission is to educate on the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and bring awareness for underrepresented populations to staff, providers, and volunteers. So that's what we try to do here today. But then also our vision, or what we're trying to work toward, is to create and foster a diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment for patients, residents, families, and our community. This environment is central to Mercy's goal of being the care provider and employer of choice. Well, the first thing I'd like you to do, and if you happen to grab a handout here, it's on there as well, or if you are virtual, please feel free to go ahead and do this yourself. What I'd like you to do to start off today, I see a couple people running in the back of the room. What I'd like you to do today is to simply just write down, we'll use this in the future, we'll use this toward the end of the program, but we won't be sharing this information, so don't feel like you have to kind of curb what you answer. But what I'd like you to do is write down 3 words that describe you. I'm going to give you just a few seconds here to do so, but I just want you to write down 3 words that describe you, or that you would use to describe you. And like I said, we won't be sharing these, but we will call back to them here in just a moment. So to start our discussion today, I want to share a quote or a passage that I found with you. It talks a little bit about assumptions. Don Miguel Ruiz is a spiritual leader and author. And what this passage says is, if others tell us something, we make assumptions. And if they don't tell us something, we make assumptions to fulfill our need to know and to replace the need to communicate. Even if we hear something and we don't understand, we make assumptions about what it means and then believe the assumptions. We make all sorts of assumptions because we don't have the courage to ask questions. So as we start our time here today together, I want to start thinking about some of those assumptions because we all have them, right? And should. We maneuver our world all day, every day through assumptions. For instance, if the sky is cloudy, your brain might assume it's going to rain, right? We can't take in all the information and think all of those thoughts without making some of those assumptions, which is great for how we maneuver the world. But when we start to talk about human beings, which is obviously what we're going to be talking about here today, instead, we have to start to wonder about those assumptions, or at least take stock of those assumptions. Because often when we have an assumption about anything, it feels like intuition. And intuition, we often turn into facts. So we make an assumption, it feels intuitive, and we make it kind of a fact without knowing any of it has honestly happened often. So to start our conversation today is looking at assumptions and figuring out what do we need to do to check those assumptions, to challenge those assumptions, and then how can we change that narrative for ourselves to become more inclusive in our daily lives, in our work lives, with our customers, our patients, whatever that might be. We want to share a short video with you here today that talks a little bit about what does it look like when I believe and act on those assumptions. So we'll play this here real quick and then we'll debrief, talk about it a little.
It's so easy to place people in boxes, drawing lines, creating sides. There's us, and there's them. Those we feel comfortable around, and those we don't. There are those of us with many chapters, and those just starting their own stories. There's the well-to-do, and and those doing what they can. There are those we share something with, and those we don't seem to share anything with.
Welcome, and thank you for coming today, guys. Today I'm going to be conducting an experiment where I'll ask you a series of questions. Now, these questions will be very personal questions, and for us to get a true result, I need you to be completely honest with how you respond. The first question I have is, who in here was the class clown? Who is never on time?
And then there's us. We who have tattoos. We who feel lonely. We who have been bullied. We who have bullied others. We who are madly in love. We who have overcome great adversity. And there's the lucky ones, whose team won the championship this year. We who beat cancer. And then there's all of us.
Okay, so in thinking about how we box people in and what that means or what that does to the individual or the whole person, it often is that when we make those assumptions, it's because it's easier. It's easier to not stop and reflect, or it's just something that we're doing automatically without taking that extra step. So what I'd like to do next is have you guys, if you're here, if you could go ahead here in Halligan, if you could go ahead and meet in small groups. If you are on virtually, if you could just go ahead and self-reflect. What I'd like you guys to do is discuss or reflect on when have you been put into a box, quote unquote, prohibiting others from seeing the whole you. All right, we'll go ahead and come back together as a larger group. So in walking around the room, some of the things that I heard that I felt like were themes worth saying or addressing are things like, I felt like a number, or I felt like I was being categorized, or I felt like I was being put into perhaps a population that even if I maybe identify with or do place myself in, I don't necessarily want to only be that thing. I want to be a whole person. So the reason, you might have already connected this, but the reason that I asked you to write 3 words that described you is because though sometimes people do use demographic or physical traits, characteristic type of things, most people, when they describe themselves, will give you a character trait. They say generous, stubborn, strong-willed, kind. We typically wouldn't say woman right? Because typically when we think of ourselves, we're thinking of the whole us. We're thinking of the human that we are. And even if, for instance, I identify as a woman, I am a woman, I like being a woman, I'm fine with that, but that's not the first thing I want you to know about me, or the only thing I want you to know about me. I want you to know the whole person. So making that connection that when we think about ourselves, we're typically not being superficial as much. We're being much more deep because we know ourselves so well. But when we think of others or make assumptions, a lot of times those assumptions or the way in which we box people in can be a little bit more superficial, right? So considering that is, I think, helpful to make sure that we look at the whole person. So in seeing the whole person, what can we do from here, right? Some things that we can do is start to ask ourselves some questions. So if you feel like I want to start working on this or really think deeper on this, one thing you could ask yourself is why? Why do I box people in with my assumptions? What attributes am I giving them without them telling me? What things am I making assumptions on, and why am I doing so? How can I challenge these assumptions? Maybe what are the times that I feel like I'm doing this more than others? Just being mindful that this type of thing is happening can be helpful to just challenge those assumptions. Or what's the opposite? What if the opposite is true? How does that kind of change the way I'm thinking? And then lastly, what information am I missing? If I have this assumption, because I've seen this one thing based on my experiences or what I've experienced with a human being, whether it be someone who I come in contact with quickly, like a patient, or a coworker, or a loved one, what information am I missing that maybe I need to fill in before I make assumptions or box that person in? So again, those are maybe some of the next steps that you can take from here today to try to find those areas of opportunity that you can use some of this to think, when am I making assumptions that I need to stop and think about versus when should I continue on with what I'm doing? I'm going to leave you with another quote by Alan Alda. Alan said, begin challenging your own assumptions. Your assumptions are your windows on the world. Scrub them off every once in a while or the light won't come in.